Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to today's Hindu News Analysis. Let us quickly analyze the topics that we shall be taking up for today's discussion from the Hindu, 19th March 2024, the New Delhi edition. So here we have three articles that we shall break down from the perspective of UPSC Mains and three which we shall consider from the prelims perspective, given that these are more factual and more relevant for the short pieces of information that we can collect from these. So let us have a look at the very first article of the day that's coming to you from page 6 of the Hindu newspaper. This corresponds with GS paper 2, social justice. We are talking about problems in association with Indian women, although not a new topic, but the article definitely has taken a very new perspective on women problems. What does the article say? What is the moot point made by the article? Therefore, the article highlights three things clearly. One thing is that it is a very confusing, vicious cycle that whether patriarchal norms of society create femicide, or is it that increasing femicide further perpetuates existing patriarchy in society. Why is it a cycle? Because the heart of the debate boils down to a concept that is known as dual vulnerability. Now, many of you, while studying various topics from GS paper to social justice, might have heard about the word vulnerable. You might have understood how in Indian society there are certain segments of population who are considered vulnerable. Vulnerable people are those who are more prone or more susceptible to experiencing social economic problems in any given society. Therefore, we normally believe that women or people with alternate gender identities, geriatric population, young children under 5, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, OBC, people with benchmark physical disabilities. These are certain people who experience a high grade of vulnerability. However, sometimes there are people who experience double or dual vulnerability because of belonging to two different vulnerable groups. This is known as multi-sectionality. In this article, we argue that women who experience mental health problems are the ones who experience dual vulnerability. On the one hand, they are women, so they will experience femicide owing to the underlying patriarchy in society. However, they are also experiencing mental health problems ranging from anxiety, depression, chronic social anxiety, suicidal tendencies to serious neurotic psychotic disorders like schizophrenia and bipolar disorders. Hence, these women are often considered as tabooed by society. They are stigmatized by society and they become the dual vulnerable components of society. The article therefore highlights the problem of homelessness among such women. The reason why in today's society we say that back in 2010 and 2021, as per the data of National Crime Records Bureau, the NCRB, 1,500 people in India were killed in the name of witch hunting. States like Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh leading these problems. Witch hunting, where women are typically women who experience some kind of mental problem or psychological problem. They are targeted, molested, abandoned, killed after being branded as witches. A very, very common problem. Similarly, there is another piece of data which says that the number of suicide among young Indian women was about 45,026 back in 2021. Even in this segment, majority of those women who committed suicide were belonging to the housewife segment. They were the homemakers, women who were not working, young married women. So therefore, when you club all the data together, we realize certain patterns that are beneath the current mental health problem, homelessness and violence against women. That's exactly what the article talks about. So let us understand that the article gives you a data from the National Family Health Survey Round 5. It says that almost 30% of Indian women from the age of 18 to 49 have experienced some kind of physical molestation violence between the ages of 15 and above. Similarly, 6% were victims of sexual violence, gender-based crime. Evidence also says that violence creates more and more mental health problems among women. And therefore, violence and mental health, they have a very twin relationship with each other. They go hand in glove. The more a woman witnesses violence within family, it could be domestic violence, it could be the case of child abuse, it could be intimate partner violence, or sometimes it could also be community violence, like in the case of witch hunting, where many members of society target one particular woman. Such women often experience a very high degree of mental trauma, which results into critical mental health problems. Now, the more mental health problems they have, the more susceptible they further become to becoming homeless and experiencing more and more violence. It is this grid between three pillars of being abandoned, that's homeless, second, being a victim of mental health problem, and third, experiencing constant chronic violence. It is these three pillars which the article stands on. The article says that what are the causes of homelessness among Indian women? Let's explore that. Apart from that, what is this umbrella label that society is putting on women who have mental health problem? In fact, the article raises a very potent question. It says, are mental health problems really biologically mental health problems? Or is it a brand name again given to certain women who deny the patriarchy and norms of society? A very interesting cultural perspective, and then the article points out to certain solutions to the problems. So what are the causes of homelessness that are constantly on the rise among young Indian women? Now, once you do qualitative interviews with women, now let's understand that for the purpose of understanding any social cultural phenomena, qualitative data analysis and data collection is always better than quantitative data collection, because with qualitative data, we are able to understand perspectives of the victims directly. So when interviewed, most of the women said that it is not true that they do not have access to mental health systems. They do have access to NGOs, they do have access to primary health centers. Sometimes even women who have access to secondary health care, who can access psychiatric help, are also the ones who run away from their houses. Why? The reason is very clear, because most of the times these women are experiencing chronic, consistent, a lifetime trauma, where the perpetuator of violence, mental violence, happens to be a male figure in the family, ranging from a father to a husband to any other male figure in the family who's potential, who's economically heading the family. Sometimes it could also be other senior women in the family who create situations of unpaid, relentless domestic labor. Sometimes it could be dowry demand. Sometimes it could be forced early marriage, including marital rape. All these situations lead to a crisis where many women who experience a lot of stress, they just abandon their households. The reason for abandonment is not because they are experiencing violence only. The reason is that they want to break out of this cycle. Somewhere they understand that the more they stay in the house, the more susceptible they will be to upcoming mental health problems. Hence, it is not true that mental health is a biological crisis. Now, many a times researchers and doctors, they just brush aside the issue by saying that most of the mental health problems, including depression and suicidal tendencies, are genetic. Some people presume it to be a manifestation of some kind of malnourishment. Some people also associate it with childhood traumas, but it is not true always. Most of the times, mental health problems among Indian women, more than being genetic, are actually social and cultural, because they begin right with adolescent and they end practically as the women age. Sometimes women are ending up in committing suicides. Sometimes women live with lifetime mental crisis which goes undiagnosed, constantly being treated as a biological, physiological problem, when it is a complete social cultural problem. Another aspect that the article highlights is that structural barriers exist in Indian society. For example, we spoke about dual vulnerability. A woman is vulnerable. A woman who is victim of mental health problem is double vulnerable. Now a woman who also comes from a background which is poor, somebody who is economically deprived, or somebody who's coming from a very, very low caste status, somebody who's coming from a tribal background. Now these people become triple more vulnerable to violence. So they experience something that's known as compounded vulnerability, owing to many identities which lead to their being susceptible to more and more violence, which go neglected often. Similarly, sometimes for women running away from home, it is not abandonment or abuse. It is a self-made decision to escape the patriarchal bondages that are forcing them to live in that cycle all the time. So therefore, families, ironically, which are supposed to give women protection, a sense of unity, community and safety nourishment, also becomes the hotbeds of abuse and violence. A very interesting article had appeared in the Hindu on 13th of March, which also pointed out that how sometimes domestic violence is not understood in office spaces. So recently the government of India has enhanced the scope of the POSH Act, Prevention of Sexual Harassment of Women in Workplaces, the act that was made back in 2015. Today its ambit has been further increased to understand the psychological situation of women employees who are safe at office but who come from a background, a family background where in the family they are being constantly forced and abused for some reason. They are experiencing abuse and hence their performance in office suffers because of that, which further perpetuates into gender, lack of pay parity, overall unequal pay for same work and lack of rise in office hierarchy. So therefore, the Act will now understand the dynamics of domestic violence and how it relates to workforce performance of women. Hence, we understand that most women, out of social withdrawal and fear, are the ones who completely detach themselves from their family. Now, many a times doctors will call this disease as schizophrenia, a disorder in which somebody starts hallucinating. So the article says that schizophrenia is more than a psychotic disorder. It's not biological, it's not mental only. When a woman is hallucinating things, who is typically known as a mad woman, a crazy woman, she is in fact living and reeling under a trauma that has come with years of abuse within the family. That's something we need to understand. For example, again, as per the National Family Health Survey 5, 70% of women that experience physical violence could be beating or sexual molestation. They either did not take help from anybody or they never even told anybody, including their office colleagues if they are working, about the problem. And hence, the problem just perpetuates. Now, there is a very fresh take that the article is also maintaining. The article says that one thing that we just spoke about was the reasons behind mental trauma and homelessness. The second thing that the article talks about is that sometimes what we are calling as mental illness is not an illness at all. Sometimes mental illness is a brand. It's a label that is given by society itself to certain women who refuse to comply with patriarchy and social norms that have been existing since times immemorial. Now let's remember, back in the 18th century and 19th century India, when reformers like the Honorable, the great mother of Indian feminism, Srimati Savitribai Phule, when she was initiating an avid campaign for educating young girls and opening schools for them, for providing shelter to destitute widows, she was branded as somebody who is doing something that's anti-social, anti-normative. Similarly, Anandibai Joshi, one of India's first lady doctors, Rukmabai, Pandita Ramabai, these were also women who were targeted by the conservative segments of society as being rebellious, as being westernized, as being women who are trying to harm the ethos of India's culture. So you see, every time a woman breaks out of the cycle of patriarchy, a label of being mentally ill, obsessed, crazy, too ambitious, too nihilistic, all these are labels that are given to her. So therefore, madness sometimes becomes a deliberate label that is imposed on these women, either to brand them as people who are breaking norms, or sometimes to give them a false notion of being sick so that their own desire to break out of patriarchy dies down and they become subjugated. And therefore, they are all the attempts to kill intellectual potential, autonomy and assertiveness of these women. So the article talks about very interesting historical examples from Middle Ages, where women were put into asylums for trying to break out of family norms and assert their independence, for demanding property, or for choosing somebody to get married to themselves. Similarly, we talk about today's society, where we just spoke about how acid attack is normally done on women who refuse sexual advances of men. Witchcraft, rather, witch branding or witch hunting is done on women who either refuse to comply with family norms, or women who are not able to have a child, or women who want to work or do something that elders in the society deny. Similarly, there was an interesting article about Jharkhand, where sometimes the upper caste members use sexual harassment as a tool of subjugating women of the Dalit communities. Here, if the women retaliate, they are branded as mad, which eventually leads to witch hunting, because the upper caste male members have the power to wield the entire community in their favor. So these are certain underlying narratives which go neglected when we try to understand the dynamics of mental health crisis among women. Now, there is one more very interesting thing that the article talks about. Article says that in today's society, which is continuing to be patriarchal in many ways, and a lot of people argue that no, today women are absolutely experiencing liberty. But we all understand that this is pertaining to a very small segment of women. Even today, women themselves are not one group. They experience multiple variations. There are rural women, there are women from lower caste and tribes, and women who are coming from sexual identities that are alternate, rather trans women. There are girl children. There are poor women who still neither are participating in the workforce, nor registering good levels of nourishment, nor are economically independent or getting any kind of technical higher education. What about them? So it is these women who are then forced to follow reproductive roles that have been assigned to them. Domestic unpaid labor, early marriage, compulsory imposed motherhood. Sometimes that results in a very, very dangerous kind of psychotic situation which is known as postpartum psychosis. A very misunderstood problem. Now, recently, articles in the newspapers were highlighting how many women in Brazil, Mexico, India, Thailand were imprisoned, shockingly, for killing their own newborn babies. Now, for a long time, it was considered a crime, an act of gruesome murder. Later, upon investigation, it was realized that these women, unable to handle their reproductive responsibilities, unable to deal with the kind of mental health agony that they were experiencing, undiagnosed, untreated, did something that they weren't aware of. So it was something that was a manifestation of mental health crisis. So you see, it is in this context that we need to understand all the underlying narratives behind women's health problems. And let's also understand, therefore, that whether madness is a label given by society or whether it's happening because of continuous abuse and violence. In reality, today when we talk about any health intervention for women, it should begin with mental health and proceed with physical health. Because perpetuating or encouraging physiological health without focusing on psychological health will never bear positive results for women in a society like India, where already they are experiencing either dual or compounded vulnerabilities. So that's what the article talks about. Can we have certain multifaceted solutions? Yes, indeed. For example, we need to understand that today, mental health needs to be on the mainstream of medical health panels. It needs to be focused upon separately. So we do have the National Health Policy 2017, which indeed has revolutionized mental health. It says that an act of committing suicide, trying to commit suicide, is not a crime anymore under the Indian Penal Code. It is having a whole new policy intervention for people battling with mental health, but there is a lack of separate chapter on women. There is a lack of separate chapter on women experiencing reproductive health associated mental health problems that needs to be understood. We need to talk about solutions, family-oriented solutions, community-oriented solutions to mental health. We need to speak about how education curriculum needs to inculcate gender equality from the very beginning. We need to reduce incidences of forced domestic labor by providing women options to work, to explore their interests, and therefore we must understand that specifically women who come from marginalized segments, who are poverty struck or experiencing any kind of caste-based marginalization, since they are more at a risk of abandonment and homelessness, we need to therefore also understand their problems by giving special focus on them in welfare schemes. So therefore, mental health is not a biomedical problem only. It is in fact a deeper social complexity. That's what the article talks about. So let's create a better educative environment, creating equality for gender. Let's create better awareness on domestic abuse in the office, outside the office, in the community, in the schools. Apart from that, let's also challenge certain typical gender stereotypes, and therefore please compensate women by providing them opportunities, also by providing them access to avid mental health care. This is practically the article summary. Now let's proceed with the second article of the day. This is page 8, and we are talking about FTA, the free trade agreement which India is trying to score against European countries. It has been in the news for quite a long time now, also because not just the EU countries, recently India has also created FTAs with Australia, with UAE. Also, there is an ongoing talk about FTA with Canada. Similarly, even with UK. Now, recently the high-level talk said that the ongoing talk about India, European countries FTA will also pave way for better India-UK free trade agreement. So in that light, let's examine what the article talks about. The article says that this FTA, or the ongoing free trade agreement with certain countries of Europe who are not a part of the European Union. For example, we talk about Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, Liechtenstein. All these countries today are cracking a very deep economic engagement with India, and the whole purpose behind this Europe Free Trade Agreement with India is to reduce bilateral or both side tariff barriers, high custom import duties, and high taxation on goods and services that are exchanged between both the countries. Not only that, the article also highlights why is this particular FTA so unique. One thing is, it is the first of its kind, which India and a European country, rather the Western world, is cracking or going to sign up. So it is definitely revolutionary. Second thing is, it includes certain things which were not included in previous FTAs which India has had with various nations. For example, today it includes a separate chapter on intellectual property rights, which is focusing on including more and more IPR regimes, even more than what are already covered under the WTO, or the World Trade Organization's consensus or conventions. Similarly, we also talk about certain environmental and health regulations in place under this FTA. This FTA also talks about India's desire to enable European countries, including these four, Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein, to provide more ease of migration of highly skilled Indian labor into the European countries. So therefore, it is a kind of multi-sectoral FTA that we are talking about. So therefore, if this becomes successful in upcoming future, it is bringing itself massive benefits for India as well as European countries. How? Because for the European countries, this is a very good opportunity, as India will reduce the tariffs on goods and services being imported into India from Europe. European manufacturers will have access to a huge consumer base that India has, being the most populous country in the world, that to a young consumption-oriented population. So therefore, it will mean massive market access for European nations. From India's perspective, it means that we will now be getting approximately a huge amount of investment into various sectors of India. Apart from that, migration for Indian labor force will become much more easy. So these are certain benefits that both sides will develop if this agreement tomorrow is very successful. Now, this has been ongoing for the previous 15 years. It's been a long time since the countries of European nation outside EU and India have been trying to crack such a negotiation, but it was always delayed. Why? Because most of the times agreements regarding tariffs were causing delays. India, for that matter, did not want to compromise on the RRO, the rules of origin. Similarly, India was trying to be very particular about how back in 2015, the EU had banned the import of Alfonso mangoes in India because of presence of certain fruit flies in them. Similarly, we also remember recently how about 700 pharmaceutical products which were clinically tested in India were banned into European Union, highlighting lack of safety. So it was under this insecurity that even India was quite delaying the agreement until it was bilaterally, mutually agreeable to both the sides. So now today, it is a major milestone because it shows how various countries across the world are trying to come out of their own protectionism and are trying to further developing trade ties with their largest trading partners. Now let's remember even EU is India's largest trading partner after United States. In fact, let's remember that back in 2021-2022, the volume of trade between India and EU was as high as about 116.36 billion USD worth merchandise. So now, what are the key features of this TEPA, or what are the key features of this European Indian Free Trade Agreement? So if this becomes successful, India will get benefited because the target is $100 billion investment into India that shall come from these 4 European countries. Besides, it will create million plus jobs in India in the upcoming 15-year period. Apart from that, there is a flexibility clause also. In case India feels dissatisfied with any concession that it provides or any tariff reduction it provides, tax reduction it provides to goods coming from Europe, if India feels it is causing some harm to its domestic market, India can always withdraw that concession if it wants to. So this flexibility has further created mutual trust. Now, trade in goods. For example, the chief benefit here for the European market will be that in the upcoming 7 to 10 years, India will remove almost all the tariff duties on the prominent items of import from European countries, including such as coffee, fruits, salmon, fish that is, or for that matter medical equipment, bicycles, smartphone parts, other manufacturing equipments like clocks, dyes, textiles, apparels, most machinery. So which means for European country, a massive market, boost of manufacturing, boost of employment, boost of forex reserves. It's a win-win situation. Similarly, let's talk about India. Now, India, when we talk about just the goods, will benefit less as compared to these European countries. Why? Because already India enjoys a huge tariff benefit in most of the European nations. For example, India is under the list of most favored nation status in the EFTA countries, which means that India will enjoy most of the tariff reduction benefits already. Either it's very less or it's close to zero. So which means the goods that are going out from India, they are already enjoying a lot of relief on tax. Hence, there is no major change that India will experience on the front of goods particularly. Now, 98% of India's $1.3 billion merchandise exports to countries like Switzerland are already experiencing a zero traffic, a zero tariff, zero tax. Where 2% are remaining, these are agriculture products where the scope of tariff reduction anyway is very, very low. Talking about trade and services, both the sectors will benefit. Both of the segments, India as well as European countries, the EFTA, they have agreed to liberalize and open up to each other in many service sectors. From India, if you talk about, typically, a very interesting feature will be that jurists, people who have worked in the capacity of jurisdiction in India, can also now migrate and seek work in Europe. Similarly, service providers like paramedical healthcare providers, yoga instructors, people from Ayush or alternate medicine segments can now, complying the legal framework, can also work closely and comfortably in the European countries. They have better access to providing services there. Similarly, Norway and Switzerland have both committed 4 and 3 years for giving more ease of migration to highly skilled Indian laborers. And they will also provide transfer of Indian multinational employees to headquarters which are situated in the Europe. So intra-corporate, within corporate transfers will also become very, very easy once they obtain the necessary work permits. Sustainable development. This is again a new chapter here in this FTA, that both the countries are agreeing mutually on certain labor aspects or labor conventions. For example, if India is a signee of 6 labor conventions as per the ILO, these will all be manifesting in the FTA with European countries. So whether it be mandates of the International Labour Organization or mandates of, Convention of UN Convention on Climate Change. So environmental regulations and labour regulations will also be mutually complied by, which will agree across various segments like the basic floor wages, basic minimum wages, gender equality in pay, similarly carbon emissions. All of that is also a part of various goods that are getting exchanged as a part of the FTA. A new thing, a revolutionary thing is also intellectual property rights. Now already both the countries are tied when it comes to IPR under the WTO's trade related aspects of intellectual property rights, that is the TRIPS agreement. But beyond that, many more points shall be included in the FTA when it comes to the IPR. So all in all, it is a very comprehensive treaty between both the nations. It is mutually benefit to both. And today India is now looking towards West when it comes to creating more ease of business and better expansion of trade. And in that light, let's analyze the third article. This is page number 7 corresponding to international relations. We are talking about the emerging geopolitical region that has all eyes. That is, from the countries of the West to the countries of South Asian region, including one of the biggest player, China. Today, the Indo-Pacific region is becoming the most critical geopolitical area due to the ongoing hegemonic claims made by China, including in the South China Sea and in most of the Indian Ocean region. Apart from that, the ongoing Houthi crisis, the ongoing Houthi warfare in the area of Red Sea has also perpetuated a crisis of trade. It has blocked various trade canals, and hence most countries are now taking the longer route when it comes to shipping their products, that is through the African, Southern Africa route. So which means that suddenly the Indo-Pacific region has acquired huge predominance. On the one hand is the war, on the other hand is China's hegemony. On the third hand is an agreement, for example, among the countries of Quad, like-minded nations who agree to promote safe, open and cooperative Indo-Pacific. So that's what the article is trying to talk about, that although earlier Indian government's policy was primarily focusing upon many other issues such as the ongoing border scuff with China or the Indo-Pak area, including how India was dealing with Russia's attack on Ukraine, its international stand. But today, as time is ticking by, come 2024 and now suddenly from January 2024 onwards, the Indo-Pacific region has become the focal point of policy attention for all the Quad countries. The purpose is very, very clear. Recently, India had a spat with Maldives. Now, we know that Indian-Maldivian relationships were heavily strained post the Honorable Prime Minister of India's visit to Lakshadweep. In that light, Maldives today is inching closer to China day after day. So, in this dynamic, where on the one hand, Maldives is inching closer to China, India is close to inking many pacts with Mauritius. Similarly, Sri Lanka is being more sensitive to Indian needs and keeping Chinese security vessels at bay. What does it mean for the Indo-Pacific region, where multiple players are playing together and more complexities are increasing day after day? So now, typically talking about the Indo-Pacific region, let's remember that most of the growing economies of the world are focusing on this area, which connects them with Atlantic Ocean and Asia Pacific region as a channel. So now, having said that, while the Indian government is heavily focusing on the Indo-Pacific region, how are the neighbor states behaving? That is something which has added to the complexity. So, as we say, Maldives is continuing to strengthen its ties with China. But talking about Sri Lanka has recently imposed 1-year ban on foreign research ships, including those coming from China, to Sri Lankan ports, which means that this will pave way for better mutual cooperation between India and Sri Lanka. Now, talking about India's Sagar policy, which talks about sustainable growth and development for all in the Indo-Pacific region, this has benefited not only India's interests but also Mauritius. Now, talking about Western Indian Ocean and many small islands that are situated here. They have also become active in the geopolitical controversy today. For example, as we say, the Israel-Palestine conflict is going on. So we know that because of this conflict, the Houthis have constantly blocked the area of Suez Canal. So therefore, most of the ships today, most of the cargo today is happening from the Cape of Good Hope area or the southern area. All big and small countries are now having to grapple with this new conflict that is going on, also which is creating a lot of destability for most of the countries. So the new chain of developments that are happening in the Middle East are now also creating a sudden reaction in the East. For example, China's advances or Chinese naval advances in the Indo-Pacific have been rising day after another. The main purpose is to create more and more geographic dominance. Now, including the China-Maldives partnership is today on the rise. China has been acting very fast to provide military assistance to Maldives, to provide security to Maldives. This, therefore, has also created another chapter in India-China contestation that is already ongoing due to so many factors, including the border scuffle between both the nations. So, most of China's, now in understanding that China's trade, China's oil, fuel supply, most of these also are passing through the same area. And because of the ongoing Hamas war, obviously the region is blocked. So therefore China's being concerned and participating in the area can be understood, it can be justified. But the problem is that slowly China is trying to create a deliberate initiative which is creating rift between India and its close by neighbors. And again, it is not new. Back in 2021 also, India was experiencing certain kind of tussle with Nepal on the one hand, Bhutan on the other, when most countries were taking a pro-China stand. Hence, China always exploits the situation of India's neighborhoods and then tries to turn its neighbors against India itself. So therefore, the clear pattern is how China's navy is now trying to create naval bases in places such as Djibouti or, for example, the Gwadar. All these ports are today being accessed by China easily, further to create more and more domination in the entire Indo-Pacific. So recently, India's Defense Secretary has said that although India has been tackling China's advances pretty well, but let's not forget that China also, in fact, is something that European countries cannot afford to ignore for a long time. So although Europe has a huge geographical distance with China, so therefore, in general, the situation of Europe is more secured. But still, they should now, it's time when they start re-examining their policy on China, given that excessive preoccupied, most of the European countries today are dealing primarily with the ongoing Israel-Palestine war. So in that light, most of them end up neglecting China. But let's not forget that China's ambition, whether it be the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, or today whether it be claiming a chain of artificial islands in the South China Sea, the territorial domination of Taiwan, or would it be the territorial infestation of Japan, all these could tomorrow also mean a dangerous, unstable situation which would also impact the countries of European Union given their close trade ties with most of the South Asian countries. So also China has constantly criticized India's initiatives such as Quad, for example, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. Similarly, India's Ocean Rim Countries Initiative is also something that China has constantly neglected. Now, ever since the Japanese Premier Shinzo Abe had spoken about a much better, a much stronger, free and open Indo-Pacific area back in 2016, China has been very uncomfortable with the idea of other countries in the area coming and creating cooperations which it feels threatens China's sovereignty. So therefore, what are the possible solutions to the ongoing China's hegemony, neglect by EU, and India's precarious position with its neighbors? If three main arguments have been made by the article, then let's understand that possible solutions would be that India needs to be very conscious about creating much better compliance of dialogue such as Colombo Security Conclave, because already the Indian Ocean Rim Association and the CSS are pretty lethargic when it comes to creating proactive initiatives for creating more security in the area. Similarly, tomorrow if Maldives and India's spate increases, the CSC will lose one of its major members, which will go and become China's ally. Again, we need to think about a new group possibly, a new group which should comprise 4 nations from India's neighborhood, including India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and 4 islands, including Mauritius, Seychelles, Comoros, and Madagascar. Probably these could also geographically secure the area and also provide some defense mechanism against China's hegemonic claims. Also, Maldives should be given an option to become a part of this new group, and yet if it continues its pro-China stand, then it better be left behind. So today, as the article says, as India claims to soon become the 3rd largest economy of the globe, why can't we also become the most strengthened naval power in the globe? Because today that is more or less the need of the hour, because until strong presence is made in the Indo-Pacific, most of India's security, defense and trade initiatives will become semi-fulfilled. Now with that, we proceed with Article 14 that corresponds with IR again, and we are talking about a development that was very, very expected, and yet it is a mind-blowing development given the sheer volume of Putin's victory in Russia. So yes, with nearly 87%, 86 to 87% of voter support, Putin once again has emerged as Russia's premier, and this will now lead to more 6 years term in a landslide victory that is being acclaimed across the globe. Obviously, it is being met with different responses, whereas certain countries, including countries like China, including even India for that matter, and many other countries across the world have congratulated Mr. Putin. It is the West, the NATO wing, that has criticized the elections, called them farce, fake, politically dominated, autocratic in nature. So let us understand briefly what exactly has happened. So therefore, as Vladimir Putin claims a landslide victory in the recently unfolded presidential elections in Russia, people across the country, within Russia also, are having mixed response, whereas it is a majority victory clearly. It also shows a very worrisome fault line in Russia's voter base, which also highlights that most of the people in Russia are more than comfortable with Russian stand on Ukraine, with Russia's annexation long back of the Crimean area, today once again of major Ukrainian regions. So what about the claims of human rights violation? What about the complete suppression of certain left groups in in Russia? What about certain opponents who were against Putin's rule, his hegemony, his autocracy? They were brutally imprisoned, and hence all of them died. Oppositions were suppressed. What about that? So even within Russia itself, there are some people who are calling it as a deepening of dictatorship. However, most people, having said that he is the only most important all-time winner, are remaining to stay silent on the Ukraine-Russia spat. So, United States says that this 87% votes that he has received are not an indication of a free and fair democracy, and by 2029, as per the current developments, Vladimir Putin's tenure will surpass that of Joseph Stalin, who had ruled Soviet Union for more than 29 years. So which means he will now, or Putin will become now the longest serving ruler of Russia. So he had also previously served as the Prime Minister of Russia back in 1999. It was a point of time which was marked by a lot of military aggression and rising intolerance of any criticism. No wonder he's being pointed out as a dictator or as an autocratic leader. Any public criticism of his policy, even today, until recently, has been suppressed. Independent media has not been allowed. So media repression is very, very common under this regime. Now, therefore, the article also highlights the retaliation and the reaction that has been coming from the wife, or the widow rather, of Alexei Navalny, a key opponent, a critic, and one of the most vocal criticizers of Putin's administration, who was locked up in a remote prison in Arctic until recently when he died in exile. It is being called as out and out a murder. So today, many people also in retaliation wrote his name on the ballot papers. They flew them. They were holding protest march. But but to no avail. So these people's voices were not heard. And today, whatever we say about the internal dictatorial nature of this regime, today whatever we say about how the US in fact is criticizing this victory. In fact, Mr. Putin also recently in a statement had for the first time taken the name of Alexei Navalny when he had said that I agree to leave him, but in return I need a swap of prisoners who are unknown and yet being caught in the Western prisons. Therefore, he wanted to talk about the release of Russian prisoners. So clearly, NATO countries view this as a deliberate murder, which is not new, which has happened before in the case of other opponents of Putin as well. So whatever they say, now countries like North Korea, Bolivia, Cuba, including Nicaragua, Venezuela, one of the chief supporters of Russia, China, Uzbekistan, Belarus, all these countries have not stayed behind in congratulating him. While West is saying that it is a farce, the reality is that the polling stations which were located all over Russia, including in the illegally occupied regions of Ukraine, the voting happened in online, offline format, but who can deny the verdict? And the verdict says that more than 80% people support his tenure, which is irrespective of his stand on Ukraine, or whether it be his stand on the ongoing Israel-Palestine war, or whether criticisms from the West. In fact, he retaliated by laughing off at US and saying that all the claims and all the complaints, all the cases that are filed against ex-president Donald Trump were also equally farcical. So look who's talking. So it's becoming like a diplomatic, you can say, mudslinging episode, but clearly he is once again to extend his regime, and the future of Russia, therefore, is something that is yet to unfold. So page number 12 is another news. This is from Indian Pharmaceutical segment, Science and Tech, and we are talking about a development in the case of vaccine research. Now, recently, Indian Immunologicals Limited has launched India's vaccine for dengue. Now, we know that dengue is a disease that happens due to vector mosquito, typically mosquito from the family of Aedes. Aedes mosquito. Female Aedes mosquito is the one that's responsible for creating this manifestation of disease, although a curable disease, but also linked to many mortalities and disabilities, specifically among pregnant women, young children, and the elderly. So this vaccine against dengue fever has already passed its phase 1, and soon it will also be having its phase 2 and phase 3 trials as per the data given by IIL, or the Immunologicals Limited. By mid-2026, the vaccine will be rolled out already, and this would be a major feat in curbing a disease that is in India today, killing and tormenting many. So now, India has also, therefore, made another feat where the IIL says that, okay, we have made the vaccine for dengue, but also we are developing more other state-of-the-art vaccines. For example, also against the Zika virus. Once again, a vector-borne disease, also sometimes causing disabilities in unborn fetus of pregnant women. So quite dangerous. Similarly, recently in the news we spoke about the KFD, or the Kaisanur forest disease, that was manifesting in people living in the forested regions of Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka typically. It was a disease that was happening due to tick bites. So this company is also now developing vaccinations for both these diseases too. So in KFD, as we know, transmission happens due to contact with any infested or infected animal, but due to increases in ecotourism, due to increasing cases of KFD among people who are dealing with animals, or the zookeeping population, the forest guards who are often attacked by these animals, the vaccine development will spell a wonder. Let's also remember that the ICMR, or the Indian Council of Medical Research, has agreed to provide all kind of help in developing vaccines for Zika and for KFD. Now, in January of 2024, that's very recently, the company IIL, it had also launched a vaccine for hepatitis A. That was India's first indigenous vaccine for hepatitis A, a kind of liver associated disorder, rather a subtype of jaundice, which was named as Havisho. So in this slide, the article talks about an important achievement. Now, the article that is on page number 12 is another environment associated article, and it is throwing up a very, very worrisome trend. It says that although global warming and climate change are buzzwords, they are cliches, they are happening for a very long time unabated, but for India it could mean a new problem, which means that there is a complete reversal or change in India's weather and season cycles now. Now let's remember that spring season in India, which is known by various names and celebrated in the form of various festivals across Indian state, is now shortening in its length. So with a lesser spring season, what we are experiencing is ending winters and immediately an arrival of harsh hot summers. The phenomena is more predominant right now in the peninsular Indian belt, but many cities in the North Indian belt also have been reported as experiencing a complete shrinking of their spring season. Now, technically spring season is a season in India that expands for 2 months duration from March and April, a period where winters are about to end and full-blown summers are yet to arrive. So typically it's a season with moderate climate. It's also a season where we see a lot of harvest, where we see a lot of greenery around. But now what is happening, a 50-year analysis done by meteorological records suggests that spring season in India is not only diminishing, in many states it's completely vanishing. It's disappearing. The clear-cut signs are that, talking about Indian states and union territories from 1970 to now, the impact of global warming has been such that for each state and territory, every month from January to May is now manifesting in new kind of weather symptoms which were completely unknown before, which is an unannounced rainfall, a sudden rise in heat wave, a sudden increase in humidity parameters, or a sudden drop in climate when winters are almost over, or a sudden spate of snowfall in the Himalayan regions. So these are all indicative of massive climate change. Now these normally are also ignored because the telltale signs of climate change are normally measured in the form of either overall global warming or carbon emission, or say for example changes in rainfall patterns, monsoon patterns. But a variation in month by month weather cycle is something that often goes unnoticed, and that's why the article gives focus on that. The article says that every region in India was separately characterized and studied, and it was realized that it is experiencing something called net warming in winter. Net warming in winter means during February, winter season is not supposed to end completely. Most North Indian states experience a decent amount of winter. The temperatures are still falling down to about 10 to 11 degrees in the night. Even for peninsular India, it means a very pleasant season. But now, no more. For example, Manipur is experiencing the largest such change, an increase of about 2.3 degrees Celsius in February month, if you compare it with 1970s to now. Similarly, while Delhi experienced a very little change, that's only 0.2 degrees Celsius increase of its February month temperature, Sikkim and Manipur, they had massive changes, about 2.4 and 2.1% respectively. So all regions have overall in India heated up in February. And the highest warming, that is about 3.1 degrees, was experienced by Jammu and Kashmir. Then Telangana, which was on the lower side, 0.4 degrees. So in northern India, the difference between January and February temperature is also widening. While January is still cold, February suddenly is becoming extremely hot, typically during the daytime. The largest jump in warming rate also happened in an area of the Thar Desert, that is the Rajasthan-Gujarat belt, where Februaries have become 2.6 degrees more hot as compared to Januaries in just the last 4 to 5 years. So there is a massive increase in temperature. And Rajasthan, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, Himachal, Kashmir, Ladakh, all these states have shown an increase in net 2 degrees Celsius plus when it comes to year-by-year increase in February temperatures. So now it feels like all the data supports the claim that summer season in India is virtually disappearing, a very dangerous trend. Also highlights to the upcoming intensity of heat. Already there are cities in India that are running out of water, which means not only a danger of drying up underground water resources, lack of agriculture, water, it also means mostly a situation where the heat wave in the upcoming summers would lead to people trying to handle it with more and more electronic equipment such as ACs and coolers. The more they use it, the more emission quotient increases and the more climate toxicity rises. So again, the summer period will be a month of vicious cycle, and this again is a dangerous trend of global warming that is being experienced now across India. With this, let's proceed with two mains questions. The first one here says, any health discourse, which means any health debate or discussion on Indian women, is not complete without understanding of deeper underlying social cultural dynamics which are surrounding them. Which means in India, the health of women are not just about biological problem, lack of food or malnourishment, lack of hygiene and all of that. They are much deeper because they also emanate from double vulnerability, compound vulnerability. They emanate from women being homeless because of domestic violence. They also emanate from women being called as mental health patients in case they are rebellious and being led into mental health crisis due to ongoing abuse. And this therefore is a very, very key discussion when it comes to women health. Second question, India is the dominant player in the Indian Ocean, but its capacities are still limited. Critically examine. So we need to say yes, how India is increasing its domination in the Indo-Pacific. We can talk about Quad, we can talk about the other such initiatives of India such as the Sagar initiative. We can talk about India's Pacific Rim initiative, all of that. Besides, we can also discuss how India today is a key partner to countries like Australia, Japan, all of these who are also predominant in the region. But then we can also talk about how India still has miles to go, given China's hegemonic regime, given Mauritius and India's spate and rising closeness between China and Maldives, increasing closeness between China and certain ports that China is creating for its more felt presence in the area. Similarly, we can talk about how China's constantly been influencing Sri Lanka. So all these issues can be discussed here, and also why is this area so critical for any future safety dialogue, maritime discourse and better trade. So on that note, we end today's discussion. I hope you benefited from it and see you very soon with other such future interesting discussions. Thank you.